All right. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
So welcome to the latest edition of Shy Hack Night. We are broadcasting live here. I'm going to wait and see if Joel can put up our um, agenda here. Yeah, there we go. Thank you, Joel. So hi, everyone. We are about to get started, but first, welcome, and we're excited for our guests tonight. But first, I'll introduce myself and then throw it over to our other co-host. I'm Cameron, and in line with our usual three-word introductions, my three words are learning about learning. And I'll throw it over to our other co-host.
Hey everyone, my name is Ryan Spencer. My three-word introduction is, I can't say glad to be here because that's too much. So how about just ate tacos? Just honest truth. So there you go.
All right. I hope everyone is enjoying the weather and having a all right time. We're excited for Jennifer Brandel to be speaking this evening about election SOS. But before that, I'll go over our agenda for this evening. So in a second, we'll have a few announcements that we'll share with everyone, followed by our feature presentation. After that, we'll have a Q&A. For those who are tuning in, you can submit questions via our YouTube chat. We're live streaming and we'll be checking the chat periodically for questions you can ask as Jennifer presents. And then we'll also open it up at the end and be looking for your questions. Just a brief reminder that if you're not aware of our code of conduct, please check it out. You can find the link to that in our Slack channel. We will be enforcing that, so just be polite, and then our usual code of conduct applies. But I think, Ryan, did I miss anything? Does that sound right?
That sounds perfect. I think you covered everything that they all need to know. So very good.
Okay. I'll turn it over to you for our first announcement then.
Yeah, so first announcement. So if you have not already done so, please join the HACKNIGHT Slack remote channel. This is where you can find links to important information as far as the announcements and upcoming presentations, and also just a great place to interact with other people who are already in the community. So introduce yourself, ask a question, answer a question, whatever you want to do. The remote Slack is the place to do it. Okay, and so we also have a few upcoming presentations. So next week we will have Victor Cobes, sorry if I mispronounced your name, talking about accessibility in civic tech, followed by Adam Anderson with Amulet Health, and then Chicago Water Week. So tune in for the next few weeks. We have some exciting presentations. Talking about accessibility in civic tech, followed by Adam Anderson with Amulet Health, and then Chicago Water Week. So tune in for the next few weeks. We have some exciting presentations. Interesting.
So technical difficulties there, but I'll do the next announcement.
Okay.
So we have a tech and data help desk at Shy Hack Night. If you are seeking help on a tech-related project, we can help out. So we have a few volunteers that can help with basic technical troubleshooting, which maybe we might give them a call. We also can help with small things like how do I do this? Where can I find this? Those types of things. We have a pretty well scoped out description if you follow the link here. So please reach out if you'd like to learn more. And I'll also do the next slide as well here, if you don't mind, Ryan. So the Shy Hack Night Breakout Group status report. So for all of you who might be starting a breakout group or running one, we have a new form that we'd like to ask you to fill out. So we want to make sure that we have updated information for people who are joining Shy Hack Night and maybe new. As some of you know, we previously housed most of that information on GitHub. We're going to try something new as we've kind of made the transition here to digital. So it's a brief form. just really basic information so that we can give people updated um, information and description about the breakout group that you're running. So I'll also send that link through the channel. So I think, Ryan, you want to do the next announcement?
Yeah, so election officials make democracy happen. They certainly do. So if you're not already aware, the Center for Tech and Civic Life is providing an expansion of a grant for COVID-19 response that's going to provide countries, local officials or local election officials and poll workers with the critical resources they need. So if you're not aware of that group, feel free to check them out, learn more about what they're doing in response to COVID-19. And then our next announcements, Code for America. So join the local Chicago chapter for Code for America for the 2020 National Day of Civic Hacking, which is coming up very soon, September 12th, which is sometime next week, if I'm correct on my time. So if you have not already done so, if you're not familiar with their group, there is a link for a meetup so you can learn a little bit more of what they do. And of course, you can join them for their day of civic hacking.
So another survey for those who want to fill out a survey. But this one is for the City of Chicago's budget. So if you want to have a say in your local government, which is something we strongly support here at HACKNIGHT, there's a budget survey. And you can see the details here along with the link, but you know that budgets are a really important part of city government and help set priorities. So if that's something that you'd like to have a say on, got a form to fill out.
Yeah, I'll be filling that out. And register to vote by mail. So if you've not already done so, make sure you're registered to vote by mail. The deadline is October 29th, which is going to come up a lot quicker than you think. So here's a few links for if you live in Chicago or if you are in one of the suburbs or even in the rest of Illinois. So please make sure you're registered to vote. It's really important that your vote matters, especially in 2020.
And hopefully everyone filled out their census. The census is really important, and we hope that if you haven't filled out your census, please do so. Having filled mine out online, it's really easy and swift process and really important for all things governance. So if you haven't already, check out that link. And yeah, tell your friends. Same thing with the voting too. Okay, so just, or you, Ryan, you want to do this one?
So just a reminder, so we do have a post-presentation Zoom call. So if you follow this link, you can join us for things like breakout group pitches and also, quick introductions to each other. We can get to know each other a little bit more. And then we'll also have a few other announcements that we're going to cover starting at 8 p.m. sharp. So right after this presentation, join us for that post Zoom call. That's all I have.
All right. So we're excited to introduce Jennifer Brandel from Election SOS, who we're very excited to host. And I'll turn it over to Jennifer, and she can take things from here. Hi, Jennifer.
Great. Thank you so much, Cameron and Ryan. I'm really excited to be back at HACKNIGHT. I can't see who's on the call right now, but I have presented there before, and I'm a big fan of all things HACKNIGHT. So I can't remember though if I presented on Curious City at WBEZ, which I founded back in 2012, or on Harkin, but one of the two. And you might also have heard my name if Derek has explained Civic Exchange. Derek Eater, founder of HACKNIGHT. I'm a partner with him on founding that group. And then for all you folks who are interested in mission-based startups who want to do things differently in terms of how you raise money and just operate in a values-based world, Zebras Unite is another organization that I co-founded that you can check out. But today, I'm not here to talk about any of those things. I'm here to talk about Election SOS, because as you know, it's an emergency and it's coming up. And so this is an initiative that my company Harken started with a number of other aligned organizations that are working with newsrooms and journalists. And our goal is to really, like it says here, support journalists in responding to critical election information needs. So our friends, the Center for Tech and Civic Life, who you just heard about, who got a whole amazing heap of money to support elections officials with their critical needs, we're doing the same thing for journalists right now. And so you might wonder why don't journalists know what's going on? They do, but there's a lot going on, and there are fewer of them because of economic pressures on newsrooms. A lot of newsrooms have furloughed people, laid people off. They're just a lot smaller than they used to be, and a lot of them have closed. So another problem is that the old elections playbook that newsrooms would use, where really they just thought about like who's going to be covering what race, who's going to be following what candidate, how are we going to be updating the results, and things that were a little bit more predictable, like that is not applicable this year. So we need to help them really think about exercising some new muscles that they've never had to before. There's new threats that are continuing to emerge. I don't need to tell you about that. And newsrooms just don't have professional support and training to handle all of this new information. They don't have budgets for riot gear. They don't have contingency plans for people being injured on their team out in the streets, or many of the other things that are happening. So we are propped up really to try and do our best to reach as many newsrooms as possible to help them get the information that they need before and during and after the election. And of course, without an informed press, we can't support an informed electorate. It's just hard to do if where you're getting your information isn't accurate or also isn't up to date on the threats that do exist. And so what Elections SOS is offering is training and support for different approaches to elections. So thinking more long-term, how do you stop doing the horse race approach to journalism and start being more responsive to people's direct information needs? I'll talk more about that shortly. And then also training and resources for threats, the variety that we're finding out new ones every day. And then we're also launching an expert network of sources so that newsrooms, when they are in that crunch and they're like, crap, I need a constitutional expert for the state of Wisconsin about what's going to happen if this procedural threat comes to pass. We have done some of that research for them, and we're sharing with them credible, nonpartisan sources for them to connect with. And then we're also doing some targeted training like voter guides, what needs to be included, especially if they're citizens who are just naturalized, or what to do in a number of different situations that they haven't really thought through necessarily. And then also scenario planning. So how can they be prepared for the fact that none of us know what's going to happen, but we know it's going to be messy, and it's going to be hard, and it's going to be stressful, and we're going to need breaks, and we don't know when we're going to have them. So that's essentially what we're creating here. And, this will be a fairly quick presentation, and I'll welcome the Q&A because we have a lot of questions we haven't answered yet. We're a new group. We're about 6 people strong. We're hiring 8 more people in the next week to really stand this up as quickly as possible. But we're not the experts in everything here. With Harken, we have collaborated with all these incredible organizations to bring the content to newsrooms. So everything from voter suppression to misinformation and disinformation to, how to protect yourself in terms of online harassment, etc. And so if you're part of an organization or know another organization that you feel like is producing really useful information around the election that we should be sharing with journalists, please reach out to me. I'll have my contact info at the end, or you can find me on Twitter. And we would love to feature those resources. Really, there's no limit to how much we want to be able to share. We just want to make it as curated and useful as possible. And so we've been working with newsrooms since May on some of these proactive approaches to think differently about the way that they cover things. And we've been working with everyone from major publications to public media and TV, community and ethnic news, investigative outlets, and even student publications and professors. And we found too that in a lot of markets, the only news organization that exists is the student publication. And so they're extremely important as well. And we're serving them as part of the journalist group that we're looking to support in this. In terms of the content tracks, we've kind of split it up into 3 different buckets. And, you could really argue that any of these things could go in any of them, but it's just one way of trying to slice and dice the many different topics that are related to elections to make them easier to find and to get training on. So engaged elections is just what it sounds like, making public engagement more a focus and not just reporting on the results or what the politicians are saying. And we have a specific approach we call the citizens agenda. If you all are on media Twitter, and you might follow a professor named Jay Rosen at NYU, who's a well-known media critic, who's been talking about the citizens' agenda for years. And finally, we're starting to get some traction, which I'll talk about that shortly. Also voter guides as well. Trustworthy elections, all about how do you show your work so that people know that you're a legit organization, what went into things, how do you be transparent with what you know and what you don't know. Obviously, misinformation and disinformation is a whole universe of things to get beefed up on in terms of education. And then reporting an uncertainty and how to be trustworthy even when we're not going to know a lot of things. Election protection is really kind of where we're moving into for this last stretch before the election, is how do we make sure newsrooms know all of the different tricks and tactics that are going to be used for good or ill, in terms of the different moves that different sides could make, or individuals or different governing bodies, so that they can be prepared as best as possible, as well as, you know, other threats like voting during a pandemic and all that stuff. So these are the kinds of things that we have on our website. Everything's open. So if you're curious about the stuff just yourself as a human and as someone who cares about civics, you can watch any of our webinars, you know, check out any of our material, subscribe to our newsletter, and we welcome that. We do are later this week, hopefully going to be launching a much bigger, better resources page that'll be easier to filter and find different stuff. So just know the site is a work in progress, but we'll have a lot more information soon. Some of the webinars, though, that are up there right now, one is from our friends at the Center for Tech and Civic Life in the lower right. You can see Josh Goldman from there, talking about covering in-person voting during a pandemic. We're doing a lot to help educate newsrooms on what elections officials are going through as well. And so we've been working with this amazing expert, Tammy Patrick on the left, who was an elections official in Maricopa County, Arizona, very contested county for many, many years. And she's just helping journalists really understand what safeguards are in place, how this stuff works, how to make friends with your local elections officials so you can really, you know, understand and get the information you need to share with the public. So those are just a few of the webinars we have up. And then I wanted to just talk for a moment about the citizens agenda approach, because it is in contrast, and this is like a big, you know, generational work, long-term change. We're trying to help make newsrooms, or help newsrooms make in the way that they position the public and they think about their reporting. So this is a very, you know, overly generalized schematic here, but it's the traditional elections approach in which a politician is really kind of placed on the pedestal, you know, saying, here's who we're listening to. The reporter's listening to the politician, filtering through the newsroom and distribution channel, and the public is kind of, you know, left at the bottom of the hill to have a lot of questions and, you know, frustration about what information the politician is sharing, because it might not be what they actually are curious about in terms of voting for this person or not. And so this is really how a lot of the horse race journalism works as well, where you're just looking at who's winning, who's losing, you know, campaign shenanigans and whatnot. It's not the stuff that necessarily when you go to the ballot box and you're trying to determine who should get your vote and who's aligned with you, that's going to help you make those decisions. And so our focus with the citizens agenda is in contrast to this. And it's really elevating and starting with the public as the most important. And it's about collecting their information needs. So what do they not know? And what would they like the candidates to be talking about as they compete for their votes? So that the public, the citizens, the most important actor in a democracy, are the ones who are actually driving the agenda of what the newsroom covers. Sounds like panacea, and we will say it's a big shift for how the muscle memory and the mechanics of newsrooms have worked, how political reporters, often get incentivized to scoop their colleagues and kind of be inside baseball with their coverage, but we are making some progress. And so with this approach, the public starts the conversation and what should be covered. The reporter in the newsroom is really a conduit. We're there trying to listen as best they can to what the information needs are and ask the politicians or whoever's running for office what their answers to that is, and then feed that back to the public so that the public is setting the agenda, hence the citizens agenda. Also, just a note on the word citizen, we know it can be problematic. We're not meaning people who are documented or with papers, but more people who are voting. And this is like a long-standing term that Jay Rosen's been using for like 20 years. So just so you know, if we renamed it now, we probably would, but for now, this is what it's called. So in terms of the citizens agenda, we also have a website that has a free downloadable guide if you're interested in how we're trying to help newsrooms, step by step through this process. So that's there for the downloading if you're interested. And what's been cool is that finally, after us kind of talking about the citizens agenda for many years, since we've really focused on training newsrooms on this has been part of Election SOS, we've been seeing uptick. So this is a screenshot from our partners at Santa Cruz Local that are asking people what they want the local candidates to be talking about as they compete for their vote. And the guy on the left, let's see if I can read this. He's a construction manager and he wants to see the city council candidates lay out a clear direction for budgets in schools. The people in the middle here are looking for city council candidates' plan to ensure that COVID-19 revenue losses don't impact school budgets. And the person on the right here is looking for people to address the health and safety of essential workers during COVID-19. And also wants to see essential workers be compensated with hazard pay. So even here with these different storylines, these are not necessarily what the politicians would choose to be talking about. But if the public is driving the agenda instead, and the reporters are just there to say, here's what people want to know, they can get different kinds of stories that are really useful once you get to the voting booth. And then a couple of other examples here. We're very excited. We got a good shout out on CNN last weekend from Reliable Sources, the show that Brian Stelter hosts, kind of in a monologue saying, what would it look like if all election coverage looked this way? Not going to happen this year. Maybe in 2024, we'll have even more folks having the public drive the agenda. Also, Vox News is doing their coverage in this way too, which is really exciting. And we have many more examples here of newsrooms using this approach. So I'll share the deck if you're curious to see how this is working in action. The other thing that we have for Election SOS is a software that Harkin actually has as our company that's called Switchboard, and it's essentially a mutual aid board. And so journalists are on there and journalistic allies who are asking for what they need, whether or not it's juicy examples of remote outreach or offering what they have. So resources for covering trans people and issues, etc. So this is a way where we can also connect journalists to one another around the country in a very non-competitive way to help each other out, because there's a ton of great information that newsrooms just don't get a chance to share with one another. So that's another thing. You're also welcome to join if you'd like to here and provide offers that you might have to journalists, whether it's using some of your coding skills or some of your organizing skills, etc. So you're welcome to join that if you'd like. It's free. The other thing we have is this Election SOS newsletter, which you can see at the bottom of our site if you're curious to see some of the things we're reading, talking about, looking at to provide journalists with during the course of the election. And then, so what we're ramping up now, in the last week, we more than doubled our fundraising. It turns out people with money are definitely scared, as they should be, and are opening up their wallets to make sure that we can do everything we can to make sure it's a free and fair election. And so what we're ramping up now is we are beefing up our resources on our website, pointing to a lot more stuff. We're launching this Trusted Elections Expert Network with the American Press Institute, where you'll be able to filter and see who are the folks that newsrooms should be talking to on these topics. And we're also looking specially to make sure it's more representative than elections experts typically are, which, no surprise, it usually is older white men who are quoted in these stories. So really looking to make sure we have more voices in the mix there. Also doing voter guide training, how to make it as useful as possible, as user-friendly to understand how to vote in this very confusing time where the rules seem to change every day, or politicians are trying to make you think the rules are changing every day. Also the scenario planning training. So really thinking about, what's the worst that could happen and thinking about that before it does. And then we're also creating this journalism school activation. This is something that's like 5 days old. So I'd love to describe it in detail to you, but all I have right now is that we are going to try and match journalism school students who have some extra time on their hands to newsrooms who need extra hands on hand to do stuff like poll watching, monitor social media for misinformation, etc. So just trying to up the resources of newsrooms who are very much understaffed right now. And so I wanted to also just give you a brief overview. This is like scratching the surface here, but just to prepare you as people who care about the world and are civically involved. You might already have been hearing this from your networks, but this is what we're hearing, is that we will not know the outcomes of many races on election night, and that's because of vote by mail. And the number of people who are doing that, states and their different cutoffs for when you can have your ballot in, how many people are in the election offices who can actually process those and scan them, all that stuff, it's going to take time. And so that time lag between, the traditional voting in person and having that stuff being able to be tallied leaves a lot of opportunities for candidates to declare victory prematurely. And that to cause a lot of problems. In doing so, especially for our highest office, will escalate political unrest and cause people to take to the streets. And if you haven't seen this, the Fraternal Order of Police Union has endorsed Trump, and he may try to weaponize the police in especially major Democratic strongholds and cities to go after people who are taking to the streets to complain about what is happening. And we should not overall expect a peaceful transition of federal power if a transition is what the majority has voted for. And so this is a new level of trying to figure out how to get ahead of so many different systems that have broken down trust in institutions, trust in truth, what it is, where you can go to hear it, who says what. Also, obviously, how partisan the country is right now. We are experiencing a lot of the same conditions that many other countries and reporters have faced, where there's a high conflict situation. There is possibility for authoritarian rule. There is violence and deep partisanship. And so we're also providing journalists some training from experts who have reported in war zones and in high conflict situations during elections as well, because they've learned a lot from that. And they want to help people prevent those situations from happening here in the US. But US journalists, if they haven't reported abroad or in those conflict zones, are not used to this kind of changing of rules. And so we're doing our best to prepare them for this being not only possible, but likely as the outcome. We hope we're wrong, of course, but you always feel like you're being hyperbolic and the world is ending when you're saying all these things that could go wrong until they do. And then it seems like you weren't yelling loud enough. So we'd rather be safe than sorry. And so this is the approach we're taking, is assuming that this is a likely possibility. But we could use your help. This is our last slide here. But if you know journalists in your networks or on your Twitter, LinkedIn, et cetera, folks that you think should be paying attention to this, we are not super well known yet in the journalism world, and we're trying to change that so folks know about this free resource. We're funded mostly by Democracy Fund. And so this is not anything newsrooms have to pay for. It is there for the taking. And you can also use the hashtag #ElectionSOS if you so choose, if you're on Twitter. Also helping within your own networks, within your families, your communities, to just normalize the possibility of not election night or election week, but potentially election month. And so urging people to keep a cool head if possible, and letting them know that it's not going to be the same situation as you stay up till 2 in the morning and hopefully understand who won. So just trying to make sure people know that this is what we should expect. And then also just knowing who your peacekeeping community organizations are and support them. So if we do run into a situation in which the police are weaponized, or there's just people who are taking it upon themselves, like we saw in Kenosha, to declare themselves as local militia, helping the police, that who those organizations are, who are the helpers, who are there to support people with food, shelter, safety, bail bonds, et cetera. So just, having that be part of what and then if you're able to support those organizations, they will need it. And then if you have any resources or useful tools for journalists to be using before, during, and after Election Day, let us know. You might have an amazing, app that you built to be able to, predict polling line lengths in different cities, depending on how many people live in an area and whatnot. And you're pulling good data from our friends at the Center for Tech and Civic Life or whatnot. Anything you think would be useful for journalists, please let us know. We like to share it in our newsletter, in our social media, and then also to highlight the stuff in deeper ways on our website too, whenever possible. So I hope I didn't bum you out too much with this presentation, but I wanted to end there. I'm happy to take your questions, and also know that I probably don't have answers to a lot of them, but I will love to entertain them. So I hope that was helpful, and thank you for listening.
That's awesome. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thanks, Jennifer. we'll start out with a few questions. Starting to see questions go through YouTube. I think Ryan and I will alternate on asking. I'll ask the first question. So you talked about scenario planning and helped us get a sense of some of the prudent preparation that's going on for that very real possibility. Wondering, what is your sense of the readiness from organizations that you're talking about? It's new territory, building the plane as it's being flown. Can you give us a sense of your assessment of how ready we might be for these scenarios?
I would say if I'm talking about newsrooms, which is who we interface with mostly, not ready at all. And so it's a big concern, I will say. And it's not because anyone's doing a bad job. It's newsrooms are completely overworked. Journalists are completely overworked. As you know, there's a million crises to deal with, depending on where you live in the country. We have the ones that are global, like the pandemic and about, rise of mistrust and polarization. But there's also wildfires and hurricanes and, food shortages and police killings and all of these things that are just taking all of the bandwidth and energy from newsrooms. And so we're doing our best. Right now, what we're doing is we're atomizing our content. So we have these great hour-long webinars, and we know that journalists like to find an hour to sit and really absorb something and take it in is very hard. So we're really translating all of our stuff into as bite-sized and useful material as possible, just knowing that the closer we get to election day, the less time people are going to have to prepare. So I will say, I don't think newsrooms are anywhere close to being prepared, and we're going to do everything we can in the next 2 months to give them those resources. And we also know that November 4th is not the end of election season. And so we are also staffing up through January, through inauguration, to have our team on hand to respond to the very different situation. I mean, we've talked to a lot of folks who are saying that the months between November and January will be the most important for our democracy. And there's a lot that's unknown there. So that's almost like the game time we're preparing for, is what's going to happen afterwards. There's only so much we can do beforehand with all the different shenanigans that I'm sure are being planned that we'll find out about as they happen. But yeah, newsrooms are not prepared right now, which is why we're very worried.
So I'll take the second question. So it seems as if social media mostly serves to amplify some of the our side, their side types of attitudes. So how can different strategies for interactions with the media and the public be different or mitigate that tendency?
It's a great question. Our partners at First Draft News have amazing resources on this front. Some of it though, and what we've heard, there was a great story on NPR yesterday in the afternoon. Elise, who was interviewing Amanda Ripley about this kind of approach of when you're in a high conflict situation, what's the best way to go about it? And her recommendation was go personal, and not personal in that like, why do you believe that, you idiot? But like, when was it that you first were aware of this issue? What leads you to believe this thing? And try and engage people where they are around like, what's your first memory of thinking about the right to vote, or whatever the topic is you're engaging with people. Talk to them as humans first, and then the issue will come out. So that's one example, is just to make sure that you're not attacking someone for what they're thinking and just asserting the opposite, but really lead with curiosity and empathy for why they have this view. Because everyone, no matter if you're on a, one end of a spectrum or another, or somewhere in between, you have lived experience that is causing you to believe that. And so starting with the lived experience and trying to learn from people is a way to enter into that conversation. Not that you're going to persuade them necessarily, but you're not going to escalate things if you really come at it from legit curiosity.
Thank you.
Also, don't amplify stuff, especially, if it's something like we're also thinking, sorry, Brian, this is one more thing I forgot to mention, we're working on right now, like a Hippocratic oath for journalists. I don't know if they'll sign it or not, but just these are 10 questions to be thinking about when you're about to tweet something, publish something, broadcast something, such as, will this create trauma? Will this, generate more divisiveness? Could this cause harm, and how? And so not to say that they won't still publish those things, but if they're stopping themselves to ask those questions, then maybe they can reframe things to mitigate, to not make it so harmful. And one of the big issues is that the commercial model of media, for newsrooms that are for profit and rely on reach and advertisers and whatnot, ratcheting up drama is part of what keeps people glued. And this is something we need to, and are talking to newsrooms about. You need to choose between that and actually keeping your community safe, and you better choose the latter this time around. So that's another thing, is just we're up against the commercial and economic models, because this is a big time for newsrooms to get advertisers, make money, and stay afloat. So
thank you. Awesome.
The next question is, you mentioned things would be stressful and would probably only get more so. What are some methods y'all consider to combat that?
it's a great question. I mean, I think luckily everyone this year with the pandemic and with rising understanding of injustices that are happening, the idea of self-care has become something in the mainstream. So I think knowing what works for you is really important, and what are the things that help de-escalate your own personal sense of anxiety, whether that's sleeping with your phone in the other room so you're not doom scrolling at 3 a.m. if you wake up, or making sure you can get outside for a walk or exercise every day. The other thing is just knowing that it's going to take everyone. So you have every right to tap out and take care of yourself when you need to, and not put the pressure that you need to be constantly glued to your TV or your phone or your radio or whatnot. And just know that there are other people who are working on this too. So don't feel like it's entirely on your shoulders. And also check in on people who are on the front lines of whatever it is. If they're frontline workers, if they're poll workers, if they work in civics, check in on your people, see what they need, order them a pizza, do what you can to just support the folks that are very much tied to this and can't step away easily.
Thank you for sharing that.
So what is the process for choosing or curating which citizens to feature via the Citizens Agenda?
That's a great question. Our newsrooms really decide who they want to feature and how. But we take them through in our training program. Who is it that you want to reach? Who have you not been listening to? Who needs to be heard more? So we really do encourage them to think about who have they typically not served, and how can they make sure that they're listening specifically to those populations, because they have issues that no one is covering. And again, what we've seen, if you're not heard, if you don't feel seen, if you're not listened to, it's it's really hard to have confidence in any institution or system if you feel ignored, subjugated, and just tossed off by them. So news media is obviously one of the many institutions right now struggling with trust and people feeling heard and seen. And so it's incumbent upon them to not just say, hey, we're listening to you, but to follow through and show them that you did. So writing back to people who asked you those questions, letting them know what happened with what they asked you, showing them in the stories and saying and crediting them for their great questions, and not just extracting value from what they're asking, but really presenting and honoring what they have contributed to your newsroom. So we really do encourage them to think about folks that they are not hearing from, and make sure that they are making themselves available and listening.
So the next question is, are there any apps / website recommendations that a concerned voter should know about?
Ooh, so many. Man, I guess it depends on what your concern is. And this is something we're going to be putting up on our site shortly. I wish I had it today. But we've been mapping out a lot of the different folks who are doing work on this front. And each of them are really taking a different part of the puzzle. So let's say Over Zero, they're an amazing organization that's looking at violence prevention and how do you equip people for that, possibility. Or there's the Brennan Center for Justice and talking about procedural threats and different things. There's just so many facets to this year's election. It's hard to know. So if this question asker has a specific thing, I can see if I can think of an organization. But we've mapped out, I think, about 40 or 50 civic organizations, either affiliated with universities or journalism or whatnot, that are nonpartisan, that are doing work around the election.
Thank you.
So is there a plan for counteracting / spreading beyond mainly liberal bubble that your organization and many journalists operate inside of. So I guess this person is trying to say, what is the plan slash strategy for operating outside of a mainly liberal bubble?
That's the question, right? Is like, how do you reach the people who don't want to do these approaches and who don't want to know? If you have the person who asked us, if you have ideas, we are all for it. What we've been talking to, especially broadcasters, because most Americans get their news from broadcast television. And we know there's some main stations that people listen to or watch that are on one end of a spectrum or not. And what we've heard from folks who have worked in those newsrooms and in the news divisions that are, a little more centralized than the personality-driven shows that everybody talks about, is that those shows are not going to change what they're doing. Like they are already, their agendas are set, they're already doing it. So, I mean, it might sound naive, but what we're trying to do is help the people who are already open to like, quote unquote, doing the right thing and trying to do their best, to give them everything we can to do their best. But counteracting the folks who have already made up their mind about how they're trying to manipulate or change things is really tough. So I welcome any ideas.
It looks like there was a suggestion of faith-based organizations
Yes.
and other community institutions that people have established trust or faith in.
That's awesome. Yeah, one group that we're working with is called More in Common, and they work a lot across religious divides and different spectrums. So they're a partner that we're working with. And then we've also talked about local libraries, if there's some activation we can do there, since people still have a high degree of trust in libraries, even if they're not, going to them in person, it might be their polling place if they do go. So are there public messages that those libraries can share? Another part of what we're doing is public messaging campaigns. So there's a bunch of different groups that are testing campaigns that will try not to suppress the vote, will encourage people to vote, will try and give people the big picture context, not create more fear and distrust. And so those are the sorts of messages they're testing now. And when we find what works the best with as many different demographics as possible, we'll be sharing those with newsrooms and other organizations so that they can also, encourage people to exercise their right to vote.
One thing that I just want to say that is appreciated is you really emphasized how the agency is distributed. It's like a shared responsibility. It seems like that's something that's maybe new for us. We're used to maybe these things being handled by some higher authority or things like that, but I really appreciate what can we do, but also there's other people working on this. That's commentary, but the next question is, what was the process like for assembling partners / funding in this project?
Oh my gosh, great question. The partners were easier to find because these are people who are already doing the work, who are really interested in having journalists as audience members for the stuff that they're putting out, whether it's white papers or analysis or data or whatnot. So that was pretty easy to say, hey, we have this group of people who could really benefit from the work you've been doing for a long time on X issue. And so that's been the easy part. We wanted to pay them for their time because, everybody's got to eat. And so we did start raising funding. Democracy Fund has been with us for a long time. They supported our kind of proto efforts at this last year with the Citizens Agenda approach. And so they were our first big funder on this that let us get off the ground. And then we have funding guidelines in place so that we, are not taking dark money. We are not, all sorts of things to make sure that this doesn't blow up in our face. And we've been very fortunate to find a couple more funders in the last week, really, that have doubled our funding. So we have raised about 1.5 million so far for the project. And much of it is going to humans to be doing work and to journalism student stipends for them to support newsrooms. So we're just kind of like the command central for bringing in those people, helping to organize different activities and then paying everybody for it. So it's not a money-making affair.
So you mentioned because of tabulation lag, candidates might prematurely claim victory. Was that a problem before? How much do you expect it to be this year?
I think it's been a problem in some sense before, and that people were legitimately confused, and then they probably had campaign strategists who were saying, "Go do your acceptance speech now." I think we're new territory with, one person in particular. I think we all know who will, we've heard from people who are doing studies around the country, and this was, data from a couple weeks ago, things could have changed now, but that 80% of the people who are planning on voting in person would vote Republican for the president. And it was pretty much flipped for vote by mail. So if you think about that, it might look like a landslide on election night, and it might not be. And so then it becomes, a defensive, move for the other party, or, they're trying to be offensive on taking it back, but someone's already declared victory, which is what we're really worried about, and what a lot of signs are pointing to being like a real possibility.
Yeah.
And so another thing we're trying to do ahead of that is that if people are worried about vote by mail, legitimately so, because of all of the different, things that are happening. I mean, legitimately so insofar as like, I can understand why you're worried. I still believe that vote by mail and getting your ballot in as early as possible, if you plan to vote by mail, is a good way to go. Like that is we still have every expectation that these are going to be counted, they're going to be processed, et cetera. The other thing, though, is if you really want to vote in person and have that safeguard, is go to early voting and polling places if you can before Election Day. And we're trying to encourage newsrooms to share more about where those are, tell them about how long the lines are so people aren't scared away and can go early and get that done before the actual Election Day.
The next question is, are there any media de-escalation tactics that have been especially effective in the past that might be useful this year? Other lessons from yesteryear as well?
That's a great question. We're actually talking to this one journalist, Amanda Ripley, who I mentioned before, who's putting together a panel of different reporters who have worked in countries that have been in war or in deep division during elections. And they're going to be sharing out their playbook, so to speak, of what worked and what didn't. So I don't have that answer now. The hope is that we can learn from their playbook and try and de-escalate, or at least not escalate things. And it's tough because, 80% of newsrooms could be doing the right thing and taking the right approach. And if some really big ones don't, it can be very hard to have the effect. So we're trying as best we can to also get to the big networks, CNNs, MSNBCs, Fox, et cetera, to have them have this training as well.
So you spoke of working with some high-level organizations like ProPublica. What are you doing? What are you doing to support local grassroots orgs like City Bureau?
Yes, I love City Bureau. Great question. So they had this great Austin voter guide that we're featuring on the site. It's not a big deal in terms of how we're doing to support them. But really, we're looking at a lot of local news, and the journalism school activation is going to be very focused as well on helping local news. So we know a lot of people aren't at their universities or colleges right now because of COVID. So they're living all over the country and trying to then map them to whatever their local news organization is, since I think we'll have more people in rural places and places that aren't as close, whether for poll watching or whatnot. So we're also working with ethnic media and translating a lot of our materials into Spanish as well, and seeing if there's additional translation needed for reporters or community ethnic papers that would like to translate some of the stuff into a variety of languages. But if anyone from City Bureau is on here and they have a way where we can support them, let us know. We're huge fans.
Nice shout out.
All right. We have another question, which is, what percentage of folks still get some of their news from local papers, TV, or radio stations?
Oh my gosh, this is a great Pew Research question. I don't know offhand, but the American Press Institute has these sorts of reports. And we know that the bulk of Americans who do consume news get it from TV. And we also know that people tend to trust their local newsrooms more than they trust national news. So that's another reason why we're trying to support those local newsrooms, is that they might be a stronghold for keeping peace, for keeping people calm, for telling them, if you trust your local newscaster, you've been watching them for years, versus Wolf Blitzer or, whoever who's on the national networks. That's what we're aiming to do as well, is to equip those small local newsrooms with the information they need. But I don't know the question. I don't know the answers offhand, but the American Press Institute usually has really awesome studies that break that down by market, by region, by age group, by demographics, and all that good stuff.
So you got two more questions. You have for two more questions? Okay. Do you, so should the media be actively trying to reduce trust in social media is a question that we got.
Wow, that's a good question, because it is one of their main distribution channels. So it's a little bit like saying, you know, don't trust this vehicle we count on for you to hear about what we're saying. So I think they are right to report on the risks of people misusing social media. But I don't know if they should say, do not use it, but maybe be educated about how to use it. And here's how to fact check, how to know. There's a great course on misinformation and disinformation from First Draft Media. It's an SMS course. It's free. It's online. I'll put the link to it in the chat actually once we're done, so you guys can have that. That's like 6 or 7 days, and you just get tips about how to spot things, and then how to also, you know, help your relatives spot stuff too. So I wish I could say we could just say burn it all down with social media right now, but you know, we're not in that place. That's where so many people get their information, and so many people who don't have access to other information resources go. And so you don't want to leave those folks behind.
Thank you. I'll ask the last question because we've gotten through our list here. We've talked about some really, like, you know, I guess heavy or substantive and serious things. I'm wondering, my question is, what do you find encouraging, or what do you think is going well, that we're doing well, or that you think is a positive movement as we prepare for the election?
Thank you for that question, Cameron. I don't want to leave everyone with doom and gloom. So here's this little formula I learned in like a leadership class a couple of years ago, and I keep coming back to it. It's so simple, but it's so true. That change happens when there's sufficient dissatisfaction with the status quo, when someone has a vision for how things could be different, and then when there's a process or a plan to make that vision happen. If you don't have sufficient dissatisfaction, nothing's going to change. People are like, things are fine, you know, you're overreacting. And then if you don't have a vision for how things can be different, you're just frustrated because you're like, what is happening now sucks, but I don't know what my alternatives are. And then if you have a vision, but you don't have a plan, then people are left just spinning their wheels because, you know, you're just like, I want to get from A to B and I have no idea how to get there, or what are my first steps? How do I even begin? And so what I think is like the good news now about all the bad news is that there is so much dissatisfaction on every level with everything. And so we know that things are going to change if people come forward with vision that can make things better. And this is also an opportunity for people who might not have everyone's best needs in mind. So it's an opportunity for a lot of folks to say, here's what I propose is the way forward. But if you or people you know have a vision that you've been testing and that works, share as much as you possibly can. Templatize what you're doing, share out your playbook, be generous with what you're learning, and try and help more people follow suit. Because right now everyone's just looking for the ideas that are lying around, and you should make yours ones that are lying around if you've been testing them and they have been working well. The other thing is just there's so much experimentation happening right now in newsrooms because of COVID. They can't do the same things. They can't go to rallies all the time. They can't just follow a candidate on the trail in the same way that they used to before. So one thing we're looking really forward to doing once we know who wins and hopefully there's peace in the land is working with Solutions Journalism Network to chronicle who did it best, who did things differently, who did kinds of reporting that we should all be looking to as the standard kind of elections reporting we do from here on out. And so I'm looking forward to chronicling all these awesome examples of citizens agenda work, or of like documenters in Chicago and how are they approaching the election, or, you know, different groups that are trying things that they wouldn't have been forced to try before, seeing if that can become kind of the new normal, because we know right now it doesn't work. So that's what I'm looking forward to, is just there's a lot of room for innovation right now for folks who are willing to take a chance and try something new.
All right. Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And for those who are trying to refer back to some of the many resources that Jennifer shared throughout. We'll be sharing those through Slack, and then you can also find the resources mentioned on the Election SOS website as well. So thank you very much, Jennifer. I think, Ryan, I guess we have a post-Zoom breakout group. Is that right?
Yes, we do. So where we have it, so you can follow the link. So I think it's posted on the HACKNIGHT Remote Slack channel. It's also going to be found, one moment. You're asking me where it's located, correct?
Oh, I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't missing anything.
Oh yeah, there it is. That's that link that we were talking about. So you can join us on the post live stream Zoom. So come by, maybe process some thoughts. This was obviously an amazing presentation by Jennifer. So thank you again for that. And yeah, join a breakout group and come say hi.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll send you off with our usual go forth and back. All right. Thanks, y'all.
Good night, everyone.